Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening in different parts of the world. My name is Nipun, and I'm delighted to be your host for this conversation in our Law of Love webinar series commemorating Gandhi's 152nd birthday. So welcome and thank you for joining us. The purpose of these calls is to share stories that help plant seeds for a more compassionate society, while also fostering and cultivating our own inner transformation. We do this by holding these collective conversations with guest speakers from all walks of life who inspire us to live in a more service-oriented way. I should add that behind each one of these calls, there's an entire crew of service-based volunteers whose invisible work is actually what allows us to offer this. Today, our special guest speaker is Jayanti Ravi. So many of us are very excited about it. And thanks again for joining this call to hold that space together. Before we begin, we always start with a minute of silence to anchor ourselves in this space. So if we could just hold a minute of silence to kick it off. Thank you. Thank you. And welcome again to our Law of Love webinar series. This was actually inspired by a very specific quote by Gandhi. And most of you might have already heard it, but I think it's worth repeating again. He says, just as a scientist will work wonders out of various applications of the law of nature, a man who applies the laws of love with scientific precision can work even greater wonders. Nonviolence is infinitely more wonderful and subtler than forces of nature, even like electricity. The law of love is a far greater science than any modern science. And so we are here exploring that. And today is I think we have a very unique guest, because Vinoba Bhave offered this metaphor of Panch Shakti, five fingers of a hand, where he said community, education, business, nonprofit, and leadership and government. And so here today, we have a guest who actually works at the intersection of all five of those. And it's a very, very unique person to actually meet that can span all five of these sectors. So I want to introduce Jayanti Ben, but before I do, I just want to make one quick announcement that as we start the conversation in the later half, or at any point, if you have a question on the live stream page, just submit your there's a form, just submit that form and the questions will get to us. You can also email ask@servicebase.org. So most of you already would already know about Jayanti Ben, have read about it online. Her resume is a little bit unbelievable, but it's true. She does have a master's in nuclear physics. She has studied at London School of Economics. She has received her MPA from Harvard. And she did go on to become, she was Commissioner of Education, Rural Development, Health in Gujarat. Overlooking hundreds of thousands of staff and directly impacting millions of kids. I mean, I actually didn't know one of our co-moderators was someone so many of us in service space adore. Her name is Swaraj. She unfortunately got sick, so all of you are stuck with just me today. But she was telling me about the scope and the breadth of the work. But what she was also saying was how about the inner journey of Jayanti Ben. She at the outer level, she's been part of historic legislation. She's been part of teams that have created the RTI Act, for example. But here as just a human being in search of something deeper, I suppose. She's also a performing vocalist. She knows so many languages. I think she might even be a Sanskrit scholar. I know her mom definitely is a Sanskrit scholar. She's the author of many books. But what she says, what makes her happiest is when people call her a teacher. when little kids call her a teacher, and so I don't know how to encapsulate all of this into a phrase or one word, but I was thinking about it and I was like, I think all we can say is old soul. So she's a person, just at a personal level. I remember my wife and this would have been probably 10, 15 years ago at least. We were sitting there, and I think we had this smile deck that came out, which had like unique kindness ideas on each one. Now imagine like a commissioner of education and you're sitting there talking about big things in the world, and then we have this smile deck of doing small acts of kindness. And so we all picked out a card, and then we had to go and do that act. And I think Jayanti Ben's act was to do something for your neighbor. And the next time I met her, she was like, Nipun, I did that. I did that act. So I don't know how she spans all those spectrums of scale, but she does. It's a joy to have known her. It's a joy to welcome her on this call. Jayanti Ben, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Nipun. It's such a pleasure to be a part of the amazing, incredible work that you are all doing. And you've also been a great source of inspiration for me. And I do look forward to sharing whatever little bit that I can. And I think it's incredible what you have been able to do.
Oh, thank you. But probably just to drop, I think what we want to do is, since you are such a fan of music, fan is probably not the right word, but we have an incredible singer amongst us to open our call. Radhika, I turn it over to you to share an opening invocation for our sacred space together.
Thank you very much, Nipun. And before I begin, I want to thank my dearest friend Sachi for introducing me to this universe. Jayanti Ben was right. There is so much inspiration right now in this group. I am so fortunate to be here, and very grateful to you, Nipun, Sachi, Rohit, for this beautiful occasion. And what I really want to sing is this. There is a Kabir Sabad in the Guru Granth Sahib. And that is so Guru Granth Sahib, as a scripture of the Sikhs, has besides the Bani of the 10 gurus, has three other invitees. There is Kabir, there is Namdev, and Baba Farid. So what I want to offer today, going with what we are, the theme of the evening is this Sabad. It says, Aval Allah Noor Upaya. First, God created light. Aval Allah Noor Upaya, Kudrat ke sab bande. Ek noor te sab jag upja. Kaun bhale ko mande. When we are all born of the same light, who is bad and who is good? There is no telling, because all of us have the same light within us. And that is bin Kabir's and so many other Sufi poets and Bhakti poets' theme. And one more verse which I want to just read. Khalak 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 mein hai khalak, poor rahiyo sar bithai. He's saying the creation is in the creator, and the creator is in the entire creation, and it's all pervading, it's all permeating. So that's the theme of this Sabad, Avala Allah. अवल अल्लाह नूर उपाया, अवल अल्लाह नूर उपाया, कुदरत के सब बंदे, अवल अल्लाह नूर उपाया, एक नूर तै सब जग उपजा, पले को मंदे अवले अल्लाह नूर उपाया अवले अल्लाह नूर उपाया लोग का परम न पूलो पाई परम न पूलो पाई खालक खलक खलक में खालक पूर रहियो सरब ठाई एक नूर तै सब जग उपजा एक नूर ते सब जग उपजा कौन पले को मंदे अवले अल्लाह नूर उपाया माटी एक अनेक भांत कर साजी साजनहार ना कछु पोच माटी के भांडे ना कछु पोच कुम्हार एक नूर ते सब जग उपजा एक नूर ते सब जग उपजा कौन पले को मंदे अवले अल्लाह नूर उपाया अल्लाहु अलख न जाई लखिया गुर गुड़ दीना मीठा कहो कबीर मेरी शंका नासी सरब निरंजन डीठा कहो कबीर कहो कबीर मेरी शंका नासी सरब निरंजन डीठा एक नूर ते सब जग उपजा एक नूर ते सब जग उपजा कौन पले को मंदे अवले अल्लाह नूर उपाया अवले अल्लाह नूर उपाया कुदरत के सब बंदे अवले अल्लाह नूर उपाया
Thank you, Radhika.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Gentlemen, we are once again delighted to have you here. I want to start our Q&A by reflecting on your early influences. I'm always very fascinated by sort of the nonlinear. I think when we look at our lives, when we look at the impact, certainly of someone like you, we say, oh, well, she did this because of this, but it's actually never linear like that because there's so many nonlinear influences. I'm especially thinking of your, the visual you had given of your mom when you were young. You were writing like math sums on the floor, and the visual that stood out to you as you turn around and there's your mom like just humbly mopping the floor of that chalk. And I know your parents have been a big influence for you. So I wonder if you can reflect a little bit about the early influences that have rippled into your life.
Thanks, Nipun. I hope I'm audible. And right at the outset, I also want to take maybe a minute to thank Radhika for this beautiful Shabad. And if I may just share one influence, which was not a very early influence, but yes, early, but a more recent one. You see, I was once on election duty in Rajasthan at a place called Hanumangarh. And during that, I came across a Gurdwara there. And there are these people in the Gurdwaras called Ragis. A Ragi is a person who sings these Shabads literally every pore of their body, because they do this every day. And it's full of, there's something phenomenal. So I had the privilege, I went there, and it was like a visit for a few minutes. And then I saw the Ragi there and requested him, will you teach me some Shabads? He took a special liking for me and started coming almost every evening. He would come to the circuit house late in the evening, teach me a Shabad or two. And of course, much later, he also came to Gujarat. So when she sang this Shabad, Aval Allah Noor Ubaya, it brought back those memories too. And so I wanted to especially thank her and thank you for rekindling those special memories. And now coming back to your question of the early influences, I think to a great extent it was my parents, my grandparents, particularly my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. In a lot of ways, I think he was a kind of a giant of a human being, because his his father, that is my great grandfather, had been in those days a deputy collector. But I think at the peak of his career, due to certain fortuitous circumstances, he had lost all the power, the position, etc. There was something, so the entire mantle came on him. And I think the way he rose to the occasion and really brought up, and it was a very deep spiritual anchoring that he had. And that's something that he, I think, passed on to us. And so he would carry us to, as a child, I remember going to talks of J. Krishnamurti, Swami Chinmayananda. And I'm not sure, as a 10-year-old, 8-year-old, I really understood a lot of it, but I think a lot of context was getting built there. And similarly, my parents, and I think I've been very privileged to have the parents that I have, in the sense our childhood was in a lot of ways a little unconventional. We didn't grow up in one place steadily over all the years. So there was a lot of movement physically. You got sort of transplanted to another city, town. And as a child, I'm sure all of us have realized this now at this stage in life, if I'm posted somewhere where I have a little room office of my own, I have a table, I have a few people that I get to work with, etc. But as a child, you have to, you're planted somewhere, and children are absolutely delightful, but then they also have their own little groups, and they're not initially very open to someone new coming in, because that person speaks a different language. Maybe you've come from another part of the country, and these were very extreme. It was like from Jamshedpur, which was the eastern part of the country, to Nariyad, where the language was Gujarati. So I remember somebody telling me, Pachharja, Pachharja. I was standing in the line, probably right in front. I didn't know what on earth was she saying. So starting with those kind of things. And so I think the influences, but over a period of, I think, 3-4 months, the same group, which seems very difficult. You don't even know where the washroom is in that school. You've suddenly gone there. You don't know where, who are the friends, where do you drink water. It's all new. The language is different, the culture. But I think in a matter of 3-4 months, and I think this really teaches you this lesson of being able to adjust, being able to make friends. And within 3-4 months, you were really, it was like what is it called, a house on fire. You're really friends with a lot of people there. And then you're speaking the local language with a lot of finesse, and then again, it's time to be yanked out to another school, and then it's almost heart-wrenching, because at that time you've made friends and you don't want to leave them. So this was also one of the influences. So I had to hop in and out of almost 7 schools in childhood. So it used to sometimes almost border on being a little harsh on me, I thought, because this whole thing of suddenly you've become friends and you're almost having to tear. In those days you didn't have Facebook, and didn't have ways of being in touch with your friends. But then at home, I think the influence of my parents, that was a constant thing wherever we went. And my mother, as I was sharing the other day, she's been a very, very devoted mother, extremely humble at this age, achieved and accomplished so much, and yet you'll probably think of her as probably the epitome of patience and humility. And so she would teach us simple things at home in a very, shall I say, in a very natural way. She'd be doing all the household chores, and she would use a chalk and give us little sums, and then she kept me busy, and she would be mopping. So in a way, she also checked it, and then so the child was, engaged in something fruitful. And similarly, I think my dad, I think he's somebody who always made us believe that there's nothing which is impossible. So always encouraged us to follow our dreams. And there was never this feeling that, well, you can't do this. Anything that you felt you wanted to try, you wanted to do. A lot of times, without knowing, we tend to be a little conservative in terms of encouraging our children or the people in our team. So I think he made us feel that the sky is absolutely the beginning. You can do whatever you want. Of course, it entails hard work, focus, strategy, and so on. And I think I'm very privileged that today they have been a very integral part of my life. And so that's about the early influences and the schools, the different cultures, the different food, everything. So long answer to your question, Nipun.
Oh, it's beautiful. Of course, a big part of you is being a teacher, being an educator at all levels of scale. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. But I also, to lead into that, I actually read the dedication of your book, Symphony of Fraternity, Social Enterprise for Human Upliftment. And you dedicated the book, and I quote, it's to Professor Kirit Joshi, and you say, who silently and sweetly stormed into our lives and transformed it with love, truth, light, and ananda. So I was wondering if, about some of your influences on your philosophy of education, but specifically Kirit Bhai, who seems to be a very prominent influence in your heart of service.
So I was answering your question in the sense, who were the early influences? Kirit Bhai came into our lives much later. I think, if I remember the day right, I do. It was 15th of September 2009. It's as clear as that. I'll tell you why in a minute. So you see, I can be a little free here because I think it's about sharing things in a very informal sort of setting. So I had a phone from my PA, my personal assistant, as she was called, a wonderful lady called Leela. She gave me a message. I was in some other meeting. She called and said, there's some advisor to the chief minister who's come, called somebody called Kirit Joshi. I mean, we didn't know who on earth this was. And she says, you have to go and call on him. And I still remember telling her, Leela, I'll just go meet him for 2 minutes. I'll just finish the formality and be right back. And I went, and at that time, this was in the antechamber, because that meeting was so very impactful. And then that was the beginning of a continuous series of meetings day after day, which I thought reflected genuinely what we'd written in that book, Symphony of Fraternity. So I went there, and this was the antechamber of our Principal Secretary of Health, called Dr. Hasmukh Ariya, again an excellent, outstanding officer who later was, of course, at the center and so on. So he had gone, as destiny, or as the divine sometimes ordains it, he had gone for another meeting with the chief secretary then. And so Kirit Bhai was in the antechamber, and I went in, and I find this person all dressed in white, and I thought it would be some political appointee or someone. Not that I don't mean anything loaded there, but I just thought, I didn't know if we would really, the wavelengths, I didn't know anything about him. I started talking for a few minutes, and then those few minutes went on for, I think, an hour and a half. And Mr. Ariya, who was to return back in 5 minutes, he for some reason got caught. So look at the way everything, there's sometimes this divine, what is the word for it? So it just happens, connives that way in a good way. So we had this discussion and so many things, and he told me the importance of the number 7. So it was 16th September. So he said it's the number 7, and that was also my number. Several things that we discussed. I knew very little about Mother and Sri Aurobindo, except whatever little one had been exposed to. But I think after that came a very intense engagement with him, because as a part of my work, I had to sort of interact with him on a daily basis. And what was beautiful was any question that popped in my mind, I could ask him. And there's also something a little personal. Maybe a few months before that, I would really have these intense conversations with me, sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and pray, and sometimes with a few tears flowing down my cheeks, I would pray and ask, would I ever have the privilege of really working or being with somebody who inspired a leader, that kind of leadership, which was not just about power and authority and rules, but a combination, who was brilliant intellectually and yet could really function from that space of love. Exactly what you said about this law of love. There was a very intense prayer somewhere. This was after I returned from Harvard, and I felt I needed to have that kind of an experience. So this was a very ardent prayer that I would. It was happening. It was not something that I had designed, or it was something that naturally happened. So I thought this was an answer to that prayer, and he was instrumental in drafting and making the Children's University happen, the Indian Institute of Teacher Education in Gujarat, the Gujarat Commission for Educational Innovations, and a host of things. But I think most of all, I was probably the biggest beneficiary of his presence there for nearly 2.5 years. And after which too, he went back due to his health, his poor health. He went back to Pondicherry. He was in a place called Care in the ashram. But something again, whether it would be, not that I'd ever been to Pondicherry before, but something my work would take me there. There would be something there, and I got an opportunity to be in regular touch with him. And even on the unfortunate day when he physically left the body, it was not definitely something that I'd known. I'd not even planned to go to Pondicherry, but I was in Chennai the previous evening because there was a convocation at the Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda University at Coimbatore. So they'd invited me there as a keynote, whatever the guest there. So I was just staying back that night, and that morning one saw this sad news, and was also present at the time when he sort of departed physically. But to say that certain people come into your lives for a great reason, meaning, and so, well, that's the way this person sweetly stormed into our lives. And it was not just me. I think the entire family, my biological family, and a bunch of people in Gujarat, that we were all working together in education. So I think that is something beautiful that we all experienced, and that sweetness continues.
No, and I'm curious. So he walks in, you don't know him, and you go in and have a meeting, and that meeting goes on. So what was it in that conversation that drew you in, and that actually you might say stormed into your heart in unexplicable ways? Like what was in that conversation that was drawing you in?
So we started. I mean, I thought it would be a very perfunctory, the usual conversations that sometimes you end up having, where you're asked about the targets and what is the achievement, what have you done. But it probably started with just a few pleasantries, introducing yourself, and then he would say something, and then I would respond back. It was something like this conversation that you and I are having here. It was more about, and there were so many things that he was also sharing about how he was in the civil services in 1955, how he had this inner calling, and 1 year later had this courage, and probably he couldn't be otherwise. He resigned and went to the ashram and worked there for perhaps nearly 20 years. And as fate would have it, in the mid-70s, he was again brought back by the then Prime Minister to a position of a special secretary in Delhi in the Ministry of Education or Human Resources Development. So I mean, and then also